The middle class, we're paying a lot of different taxes and maybe not seeing all the rewards all the time.
For me, I'm old. I am a pensioner, that's okay, but the young children, they need something for helping for school and helping to have a job.
The truth of the matter is, our economy needs to improve. Without improvement in our economy, Toronto's lost. Ontario's lost.
Just about 3.5 hours to go until polls close in the Ontario election. Doug Ford called this election more than a year ahead of schedule, insisting he needed a strong mandate to fight Donald Trump and those Trump tariffs. So is that what this election became about, or did opposition leaders succeed in elevating other issues to the ballot box? A special Ontario election edition of our Front Bench is here to answer those questions. Rob Benzie is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Laura Stone is the Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. And Sabrina Nanji covers Ontario politics for the Queen's Park Observer. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. Thanks for making the time. Benzie, I'll start with you. You know, Doug Ford hoped that Trump was the ballot box question. Is it?
I mean, I think it's worked for Mr. Ford if the polls are to be believed, Vashi. I think that he had looked for a reason to have an election. Remember, he's been looking for a concoction to confect an election since May 2024, casting about for different rationale. And Donald Trump and these threatened 25% tariffs gave him the excuse that he was looking for. They do want to get out in front of the RCMP investigation into the Greenbelt scandal because they do fear that there could be charges against someone, even though Mr. Ford says that no one in his orbit did anything wrong. There's always that concern. So they looked for a rationale. Donald Trump gave them one, and you saw Mr. Ford in his baseball hat with Canada is not for sale and the hockey sweaters and all that stuff. And other than his gaffe, the hot mic that he was caught saying that he actually wanted Donald Trump to win the election in November last year, I think that it has worked to his advantage.
Yeah, despite Sabrina, all of what Rob just lays out, we have Nick Nanos coming up in a few moments, and his tracker throughout the campaign shows just how little movement really for any party there was.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, not much has changed, in the polls since day one of this campaign. And to Benzie's point, it couldn't have gone better for Doug Ford. I mean, we've been talking about the ballot box question being a lot about Trump and tariffs and his rivals, Bonnie Crombie with the Liberals and Marit Stiles with the NDP, they've been having a hard time getting their message out there, having a hard time getting it to stick. I mean, we had the Liberals talking a lot about healthcare, a lot about access to a family doctor, and we did see, the Liberals overtake the NDP in the polls sort of, towards the end of the campaign, while the NDP has been talking a lot about affordability. They're talking about the grocery rebate, rent control, housing, that sort of stuff. But again, I think Nick Nanos will probably tell us more about this, but the NDP's vote is more concentrated and more efficient. So with those two jockeying for second place, I think that's the more interesting race to watch tonight.
Yeah, it's so in any other time, if we were talking about a provincial election, Laura, here in Ontario, healthcare and affordability would be what we are talking about. And that is what the opposition party leaders are talking about. But to Nick Nanos' point, and Sabrina's, like they have failed, if the public opinion polls are to be believed, to punch through.
And it wasn't for lack of trying, right? I mean, Bonnie Crombie had emblazoned on her bus stats about family doctors, about people waiting for hallway health care, people who've died waiting for surgeries. There's some debate over whether those numbers are accurate, but she had that on her bus everywhere she went. That was number one thing that people saw. It wasn't her face. The NDP have tried to make this very much about affordability. They've both gone after Doug Ford on his housing record, but it just seems like everything played into Ford's hands in terms of Trump and the fine line that Mr. Ford walked between being a campaigning PC party leader and being the premier of the province. And we saw remarkably during this campaign, Mr. Ford travel to Washington twice in his capacity as Ontario Premier and as chair of the Federation, which is the Premier's group, meeting with U.S. officials, meeting with lawmakers, lobbying against these Trump tariffs. This was all happening in real time. And so he was kind of able, and Mr. Trump helped him keep this issue of the tariffs, of the threat of the U.S. tariffs to the Canadian, the Ontario economy, was kept front and center in real time as Mr. Ford straddled this fine line between both worlds of both being a campaigning leader and being premier of the province.
And when you look back in retrospect, Rob, it almost feels like that was all set up in advance of the election call, right? Because, and we were talking about this earlier on the show with David Peterson and Tim Hudak, like, there was this vacuum in Ottawa because of the uncertainty that of all politicians across the country, you know, the person who ultimately filled the vacuum was Doug Ford, with the hat, with the comments that on Donald Trump and the positioning of, you know, as he described it, of Canada. Like, all of that happened even in advance of the election call, which appears to have set him up, right?
No, exactly, Vashi. And you and I talked about this on the radio earlier today with Laura. It's true. He filled that vacuum. I think David Peterson was correct. And full disclosure, Premier Peterson is also the chair of Torstar, the company that owns the Toronto Star. So he is my colleague, and I always agree with him publicly. But but in fairness, to what David said to you, Vashi, about it being a bit of a humiliation. That trip to Washington. Laura and I were there, and it was like they were lucky they got that meeting at the White House with, you know, 2 mid-level aides. I know, you know, they made a big deal about it, but I don't think that their lobbying efforts had any impact whatsoever. Dominic LeBlanc, the finance minister, was there at the same time meeting with real players like Howard Lutnick. So that was a bigger deal. But even still, we still have this threat of Trump tariffs hanging over us. So I think Mr. Ford got the frame that he wanted for an election. But, you know, be careful what you wish for, because now he's probably going to have to deal with these things if he's reelected tonight, and he's going to have a big challenge. Ontario's economy is so dependent on trade that if the Trump tariffs hit hard, this province it'll be like when the NDP was in power in the early 1990s here, and people will be running Ford out of town in the next election if he's not careful.
Well, I mean, he's only got a few days before apparently he can, you know, we'll all be finding out exactly how potentially impactful those tariffs are. When it comes to Bonnie Crombie, Sabrina, and the Liberals, I wanted to unpack, in your view, what the stakes for her are tonight. I'm sure, like, you know, you've been talking to many Liberals. I've talked to a few who were, you know, saying the fact that even her seat is up for a question, like, is a question, could be determinative tonight. Official party status and whether or not they can retain it could be determinative of her leadership. How big of a deal is tonight for her?
Yeah, I think the stakes are, you know, arguably the highest for Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals. I mean, she won that leadership, you know, talking a big game, talking about how she wants to bring the Liberals back from the political wilderness. You know, they've been sidelined since 2018, not even recognized status. And so I think for sure, you know, especially if she doesn't win her seat, we know that the former Liberal leader, Stephen Del Duca, couldn't win his seat back in 2022. And they've got really high hopes with Bonnie Crombie because she was a popular mayor there. But the PCs have really been going hard in Mississauga East Cooksville, where she's running for her seat there. They've got, you know, former PC leader and Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown's mother-in-law running against her in that riding. They've sent, you know, heavyweight ministers like Pradmeet Sarkaria was there. He represents Brampton. You know, Stephen Lecce was there from Vaughan. So they've really been bringing out the big guns to try and bring her down in a peg there. But she's been putting up a big fight too. And so I think that their hopes are really high. You know, we know Mississauga can make or break you, but in 2022 that was PC territory. So I think for her, you know, she needs to get at least recognized status. They need to get at least 12 seats, and I think, you know, hers is one of those.
What about, Laura, the NDP and Marit Stiles? I mean, federally, we're talking about such a vote depression for the NDP. The Liberals' gains have largely been at their expense. Like, what's at stake on a provincial basis for Marit Stiles and the NDP tonight?
Well, I think a lot is at stake here. I mean, of course, expectations are high for Bonnie Crombie, but she sort of has nowhere to go but up, right? The NDP are the ones who are set to lose potentially a dozen or more seats if we're looking at the polls and looking at the way things are going and the way that the Tories have been trying to pick up NDP seats in Windsor and Niagara and Hamilton. The stakes are high, and it is interesting to link it to what's going on federally. You know, we've all been looking at, obviously, the link between the federal Conservatives, the provincial PC party, what's happened with the Liberals and sort of the resurgence of the federal Liberals with their leadership race and what's happening in the polls. The NDP have really struggled federally. And so in the post-mortem of this campaign, if the NDP is not able to hang on to official party status, if they do fall to third place, I think there'll be a lot of soul searching as to whether Jagmeet Singh's struggle in the polls federally has impacted the party here. And I think there's also kind of a soul searching of what that party stands for now, what they represent. I'm not sure, though, that Marit Stiles will be leaving her post after tonight. I think her own seat is fairly safe. I think the bigger question tonight is regarding Bonnie Crombie and whether she can win the Mississauga seat and whether she can expand the Liberal base in the GTA, which is what she promoted when she took on the role.
Benzie, Laura mentioned the potential federal takeaways, particularly in Southwest Ontario, in vote-rich, the vote-rich GTA. How closely do you think federal parties are going to watch tonight?
I think they're watching really closely, Bashi. I mean, we saw Chrystia Freeland casting her ballot for Bonnie Crombie's party today, and she put that on social media, which happened just days after Crombie endorsed Mark Carney to be the leader. So, and interestingly enough, Freeland is the good friend of Doug Ford's. They're personal friends and worked closely together during the pandemic. So it's politics makes for some really strange bedfellows. Having said that, I think Crombie has said that Mark Carney, his surge has helped her at the doors. It used to be that no one wanted to see a Liberal at their doorstep because everyone was so cross with Justin Trudeau. That has dissipated. They've lanced that boil, and I think that has helped them come back. I mean, Laura and Sabrina can attest to that too. I think that they've managed to decontaminate the Liberal brand. Carney has, frankly, and this leadership race has, just because now that Trudeau's gone, everyone can kind of move on, and that has been a part of Crombie's success. If she is able to get party status and leapfrog the New Democrats tonight, it'll be in part thanks to that.
Yes, one Liberal today, Sabrina, told me like it's as though, you know, Trudeau was certainly an anchor on them. Like, they were, part of the reason that they felt they were sinking, or at least their brand. The removal of him, it's yet to be determined whether that's a boon for them, but it's certainly no longer dragging them, is their view.
Yeah, I think that they've shaken off that baggage. And it was interesting to see Bonnie Crombie endorse Mark Carney just a couple of days ago, 2 days out before Election Day, endorsing the federal Liberal leader. And I had talked to some Liberals who said they wanted to essentially piggyback on some of the momentum that the federal Liberals are having, that they're all Liberals at the end of the day, and, they wanted them to get out and door knock the federal people and, sort of ride that momentum too. So definitely, I think that they've shaken off that baggage, but don't forget, Queen's Park and the Hill tend to elect opposites. Yeah. So I do think that, at least right now, that the situation would be more beneficial if there are, for Doug Ford, if the Liberals stayed in power federally. There's also questions of, funding too, and we know that Ford has had a good relationship with Chrystia Freeland, but at the same time, he says he can work with anyone, right?
It's so funny, Laura, when you think back a few months ago, that part of the reason the provincial Tories wanted to get out ahead of everything was not necessarily Trump at that time. It was to get ahead of a Poilievre government, which they felt would be limiting in some of the money that they were, receiving at this point in time. And they were so certain, as everybody was at that time, just a few months ago or 6 months ago, that it was going to be a big majority.
Yeah, how quickly things change in politics. And I mean, they also wanted to go up against Trudeau and the carbon tax, right? Yeah. And that seems to be not an issue anymore, certainly in the federal Liberal leadership race. And that's really taken a back seat now. I do think, the timing for Doug Ford couldn't have been more perfect right now. I still think they would have wanted to get ahead of a federal campaign, even for things like volunteers and resources. Clearly, the Trump question and the way that they framed this and used the Premier or Mr. Ford's position as, again, the chair, this all happening as the campaign plays out, I don't think could have worked out better for the Tories. We'll see what happens tonight and whether they're even downplaying expectations, saying that they're hoping to win 89, 90 seats, pick up about 10. Could that be even more? And is it possible that one or both of the opposition parties loses party status again? I mean, when we talk about a coronation when it comes to the federal race, this could be a coronation of Doug Ford for the next 4 years. And then, as Benzie has mentioned, you really focus on, okay, what is his party going to do now? Who's going to kind of uncover some of this stuff? Who's going to oppose it? And does that give him carte blanche to give a mandate for the province for the next 4 years?
We shall see, just in a few hours away. Thanks, everybody. A special edition of our Front Bench. Robert Benzie, Laura Stone, and Sabrina Nanchi. Pardon me.